You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Power Athlete Radio listeners, we have a special podcast for you today with Andrew Sullivan, aka Sully. Sully is a former member of Naval Special Warfare's Development Group. Since retiring, he has put his efforts towards making our community safer by raising the training IQ of police officers. The Community First Project is a registered 501c3 that trains law enforcement with funding from the private sector. The initiative was started by Blue Force Strategies with the singular goal of working to bridge the gap between the high-level training our police require and the funding necessary to execute it. Buckle up, Andrew Sullivan. Hey, welcome to another episode of Power Athlete Radio. I'm John Welborn, CEO of Power Athlete, and I'm joined by Sully, aka Mr. Andrew Sullivan. Thanks for coming.
I appreciate you having me. Great to be here.
Yeah. I feel like we've known each other a long time, like old friends.
I think we just did a podcast before we started the podcast, right?
No, I think we were worried we were going to actually run out, but I don't think there's any chance that we're going to do that.
I think we're good.
So, we got connected through a mutual friend, Mike Sorelli.
Yep.
And you have kind of an interesting background and an interesting present mission.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Yeah. I retired from the SEAL teams not too long ago. Well, I guess almost 3 years now. So I guess that is a long time ago. But
how long were you in?
So I medically retired at 18 years. So it put me in the teams the whole time. So after boot camp, straight to BUDS or A school, then BUDS, and it was in the SEAL teams the whole time.
What year did you graduate from BUDS?
03 ? Right around there, 03, 04.
Yeah. So after 9/11.
Correct. Yeah. I went to the recruiter the day after 9/11. I had always had it in my head that I wanted to do this, but I just needed that little bit of motivation to kind of walk away from my career or my life that I was in and actually take the risk. And so the next day I went talk to him and like, hey, how soon can I get on a plane to boot camp?
What were you doing at the time?
I was actually, funny enough, I was working for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. So I got out of college. I didn't graduate at that time, but I got out of college. I had a buddy who just started working for them. And he's like, yeah, hey, come on down, man. I didn't know he got a bonus for bringing guys in. All right. And I ended up doing it for a couple of years. And it was interesting. It wasn't the best work, but it was all recent graduates of college, right? So it's one of the largest employers of college graduates every year. So you're just working with a bunch of 22, 23-year-old kids, and you work all day and half days on Saturdays, and then you go hang out at night and do happy hours. And it was actually kind of fun learning how to run a business. So not that I would ever want to do it again, but it at the time it was good. And I appreciate I made some good friends, people I still talk to.
Nice.
So, and
then you go to the recruiter, you join the Navy.
Yep.
Go into BUDS, and then obviously go to your first SEAL team. Go
to my first SEAL team on the East Coast, which I was on the East Coast the whole time. And checked in, started doing school, started learning. It was just mouth shut, ears open, and try to be good at your profession. And next step is deployments and deployment. And
well, you kind of hit it. I mean, it's interesting over the years, having worked with NSW and the SEAL community, there's a certain kind of age group of guys that are about my age, about your age, where all of a sudden they
27, right?
Yeah. I'm hoping to be 30 one of these days.
Right.
But like, it's a kind of an interesting thing where, just by the function of age and having this war, I mean, like Doc Parsley, he decided to go to med school in 2000.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden 9/11 hits, he's in med school and he's like, shit, I had trained in this. And, I was a peacetime SEAL and then I get to go to med school. And he kind of was like, I missed my window. If I had just hung out another year, I would have got a chance to kick indoors.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. There's a lot of guys. I mean, when I was going through training, there was nobody that had seen combat that was putting me through training, right? Because we were in that age between Vietnam and the next war where we didn't do anything in the Gulf War really. So I understand the frustration of those guys, but yes, I hit it at the right time, and you can't chase it. If you're gonna find it, it's gonna find you, and that's kind of how it was. 9/11 was the motivator, and I joined, and man, 2 decades of sustained combat.
Wow.
Which is a lot, but not a lot of people can say that, right? Timing was right, I guess.
And then what was the, you said medically retired.
Yeah. So at some point in somewhat of a administrative decision, when the body just stops working and you kind of have to make that decision whether or not you want to push through it or kind of look to the next battlefield. And I was at that point at 18 years. And once you kind of get past that 18 and you start the process around 17 and a half, they're just going to push you through to 20 years. So you're riding a desk for the next 2 years. And I didn't want to do that. That just isn't me. So you start the process, and it's just going to doctor after doctor and diagnosing all the stuff you got wrong, which was a long process. And then
there's probably not a SEAL that's probably done as, that length of time that isn't.
Half that time.
Yeah.
It's amazing what the mind will make the body do when you have that mission and you're front sight focused, we say, and you'll work through all kinds of injuries. And, you know that coming from your background as well. So when you finally stop and get off the train and start listening to the body and what it's saying, you realize just how hurt you actually are and what you need to do to fix it, which is an ongoing process.
Yeah.
So
how's your training today?
It's better probably over the last 6 months than it's been since I got out, but I train based on how my body feels. Right. I have my program that I work, but it needs to be flexible. Yeah. I'll wake up some days and I can't stand up. So it's like, okay, I'll crawl to my medicine cabinet, take some pills, lay down for a little bit, and I'll wake up and like, all right, yep. All right, I can do half a workout, or I can dial the weight back or the performance back, but I'm going to get something in. And kind of showing my age here, I spent 30 to 45 minutes just doing movement prep, stretching, and just getting ready. This is something I never did in the beginning, first half of my career, because we didn't know any better back then. And then my workout ends with another 30 minutes of just stretching and icing and hot cold contrast, all this stuff that we didn't start doing until probably my body was already in rough shape. So
we interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Let me introduce you to our Holistic Athlete Movement Readiness Program, also known as HAMMER. Created after working extensively with Naval Special Warfare, the U.S. Army, Marines, and first responders. HAMMER is battle-tested training sharpened at the highest level, delivering when it counts. If you're a warfighter, door kicker, or first responder, head to powerathletehq.com/HAMMER and claim your 7-day free trial today. Now back to the show. I remember the first time we went out to Damnick, we worked with the guys that were literally a tent.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And there was that little kind of almost I think it was like a covered tent, portable something with some exercise stuff. And we were outside, and I remember we were so excited, hey, we're going to work with the guys from DevGuru, and we showed up, and I was like, this is where you guys fucking train?
Yeah.
And most of the guys are like, yeah, that's why we got garage gyms.
Yep.
It just was not a good environment. And I remember we were out there doing a bunch of training stuff. And then the next time we went back, they had built a new facility. And they had, light beds and float tanks and had all this really bitchin' shit and a really killer gym. And I'm like, thank God.
You've worked in the community enough that there was definitely a kind of a line in the sand moment where we realized how much money we're spending to train guys like me to get to the point of performance, and to lose somebody from a non-combat injury is just a complete waste of money. So for them to invest in our physical and mental health was crucial. And, we talked about being in the right age group time to be in the combat throughout my career. But man, the first 10 years of that, there wasn't the physical and mental performance side of it that we have on the second half of my career.
When do you think that started, or what do you think was the big push for that? Because I know that they were fighting it for a long time because they don't, unless it's beans, bullets, and bombs, they don't want to spend money on it.
And it's the relationship with big military, the big Navy, big Army, in trying to get them to buy off on something for one community that's not reaching the rest of the military. And we are just a 1% of that community, right? The military community. So I think that was the big holdup. We saw it a long time ago, but to be able to implement was hard. And obviously we spent a lot of time downrange, and then to try and get the same thing downrange was even harder.
Yeah.
So, but they got it done, and it still needs to improve, but man, it's head and shoulders above when I came in. It's amazing.
Do you think it's almost like a cleansing of the water effect where, you kind of had the old guard, and then all of a sudden those guys age out and they leave and the command leaves, and kind of younger guys that are realizing the need, hey, I wish I'd had this kind of come through. And now all of a sudden the command is this is more forward facing in a lot of ways.
I think in some degrees, yes. But I also think that the older guys like me who were doing the job and going down range and getting hurt and having to recover, we're seeing the need for it and pushing for it so that the next generation wouldn't have to deal with what we were dealing with.
Sure.
So, and obviously the next generation, millennials, whatever you want to call them, they're a lot smarter than us, and they see that stuff and they ask questions and
Sure.
they push back all the time, which is great, right? You just need to know how to harness that for positivity.
Did you see a change? Like, I always thought that's funny. Did you see like a kind of change? Because we joke, like we're, I guess, Gen X.
Yeah.
And now you see like Gen Z and millennials and this other deal. I wonder in the SEAL teams, you had all these kind of Gen X guys, and then all of a sudden these different ones, and you're like, whoa, this is a completely different breed than what we're used to.
100%. I don't know. I guess I have a little bit different opinion. Like, we can treat them differently, or we can try to find ways to adapt to their behavior, right? Because if you do that, their behavior, they work in teams really well. It's kind of how we brought those people up. Our generation brought up that generation. We're the reason they act the way that they act. So we can't expect them to then change because now they want to assimilate to our community that we're in right now. I mean, yes, there is some degree of assimilation, right? They have to do things that fit. But we also need, I believe, to be exploring ways to utilize some of their strengths that come from that generation. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a lot of headbutting that goes on because just not used to it.
When you were in the, like when you were going through BUDS, your instructors hadn't been downrange because I guess like those guys hadn't rolled through yet, right?
None. I didn't have any instructors that had seen combat.
Wow.
Yeah. So we were learning Vietnam era tactics. We weren't using night vision back then in BUDS. I think, I don't know, maybe it was SQT, like after BUDS, where we got the mono, the single tube.
Yeah, PDS-14.
Yeah, only one guy had them, and it was like the point guy, and he just bring it up and look around. It hung on a lanyard around. It wasn't attached to a helmet or anything. And and we came a long way, obviously. And then there was differences between the coasts as to the tactics and how to utilize it. So it was a weird time.
You think there's a big chip on the shoulder for the West Coast guys to not be as good as the East Coast guys?
Not at all, man. It definitely, when I first came in, there was, but man, I think early on in my career that went away. Once we started seeing sustained combat downrange, it was like, all right, we don't have time for this. It's still a good-hearted, West Coast guy. You surfing? What, great hair.
In San Diego.
Right. So there's that good nature, brotherhood ribbing, but I think we've come so far from where we were, and even working with other groups, our partner forces in the Army, it's changed a lot. And the perception now is we're one team, we're one fight. Like, we need to be information sharing and knowledge sharing, and we can't have that standoffish behavior that we had before.
What was pretty interesting for me is, the SEALs were always like sea, air, land, and really just kind of sea focused. And then all of a sudden we go into a kind of a mountain warfare environment. And now all of a sudden, like, the SEALs adapt and become these kind of like, mountain warfare type sand, rock type of deal. And now that since we've left Afghanistan, I'm sure they've gone back to their original kind of designations and kind of like a moving back and maybe not losing that intrinsic knowledge, but actually going back to kind of the original mission, would you say?
I think we need to be prepared for any mission at all times. And certainly for 2 decades of the wars in the desert. So our priority on maritime operations was still there, but we weren't going out and diving a lot. We were keeping up the qual and keeping up the knowledge, and we had experts that were ready to do it if we needed to, but it wasn't the mission at the time. So, as the war kind of slowed down, or the wars slowed down, we definitely have to get those baseline fundamentals back up to par. Anything that we kind of let fade a little bit because it wasn't the current mission. So, that's just problem solving. That's what we do. Tier 1 special operations, we problem solve. And part of that is looking 5-10 years down the road and figuring out what the next problem is and being ready to solve it.
So you retired 3 years ago, and you obviously being a problem solver, looking for ways to utilize your skill set. Yeah. And you kind of assess that there's basically a huge gap of knowledge and just tactics, physicality, physical fitness. I mean, a lot of things. And that's within kind of the civilian law enforcement community. Yeah.
So I got out, and I didn't really have a plan, but I also had a retirement. So I didn't really need to have a solidified plan to be financially stable or have, insurance, whatever. So I was a little focused on, all right, I'm going to be around my kids. I'm going to do some for-profit stuff, training, military, government, SWAT teams. And as I'm doing that, I'm watching the news, and I'm seeing these critical incidents play out in law enforcement. as I'm training law enforcement, and I'm not seeing the problems in the people that I'm training as I'm seeing it play out on TV. And the more I looked into it, I just realized, I'm training like 3% of law enforcement. I'm training SWAT teams. The people that actually have budgets have the ability to train and the time to do it, but they're not the people responding to active shooters, acts of terrorism, all this stuff. It's whoever's closest in proximity, which is usually a school resource officer or a patrolman, a woman, and they have the least amount of training. And I started to ask the question why. And I was reaching out to my friends in law enforcement, really close with Boston police. And they don't have the budget for it, because it's a lot of this stuff is a once in a career event for these cops. So it's almost a roll of the dice that it's not going to happen. So why are we going to spend the money to train it? Right. Which
feels like the exact opposite.
Right. Hope isn't a tactic. Yeah. We hear it all the time.
But if your plan involves hope, we got bigger problems.
100%. Absolutely. So I'm thinking, well, if you're telling me that money is the reason that you aren't prepared, I will pay for it and I'll provide the instruction, and let's do this. And that's kind of where the idea for the 501c3, the nonprofit, came. Was I just wanted to give back to that community, because I relied so heavily on law enforcement when I was doing my dozen deployments and downrange, and my family's home, my kids are home, and man, they looked out for me all the time. And I reached out to my friend Paul Fitzgerald, who was retired superintendent of Boston Police, and kind of pitched him this idea. I had my partner at the time was our partner unit with Army, so Army Tier 1 Special Operations, and ran it by him. And we just this is a great idea. Nobody's doing it. Why? And I know I'm going to get support from my community from the instructor side. And we started in Massachusetts, and we figured if we could start in the state that's definitely to the left, but also very pro-military, pro-law enforcement, right? There's a lot of blue-collar, generational people in that state. And in 8 or 9 months now, we've been fundraising. We've hit over $350,000, and we're putting it all back into law enforcement, all going into training patrol level officers on fundamentals. And what I'm finding out is the training that we get now for law enforcement, that's kind of the standard, if they get it at all, is, it's training from other officers who are really good at their job. And I don't want to come here and say officers aren't good at their job. They're great at their job. Sure. Where they're falling short is that 1% critical incident active shooter, because they don't get trained. Yeah. Right. We lost my train of thought there. But we start pushing in Massachusetts to get support. We started fundraising. We got people to donate, and we got departments actually to buy in and let us come and train. And what I was going to say is we realized with these other people that are teaching it's people that have never been in active shooter situations, learning from a curriculum written by people that have never been in active shooter situations.
Seems what could go wrong.
Right. Being taught by people that have never been in active shooter situations to people that have no baseline fundamental experience on any kind of tactical capability. And you have this community of veterans, 20 years in sustained combat, that went downrange and did this for a living, night after night after night, of being in active shooter situations where people want to kill you. And now we're saying, hey, I'm coming in and I'm going to teach you guys some of the things that made us handle high stress, high threat better. And I'm going to pay for it. And man, people absolutely seem to love it, right? Because they need it. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I can't teach you to be a Navy SEAL in a week. But what I can do is I can identify a lot of the shortfalls in your training.
There are a bunch of programs where you can go as an executive, and they basically throw sand on you and make you to bake sugar cookies, and they give you a fucking...
And we do that as some of our fundraiser things. Like if you want to come, we call it Operate It for a Day. If you want to make some donations, we'll bring you in, we'll shoot some guns, we'll put you in, some situations that we would have potentially seen downrange. And it's fun. And it's a cool way to keep the community involved in our mission, is when you get to do something fun, because everybody likes to shoot guns and go out and pretend like they are something that they never were going to be. It just wasn't in their career path.
But it's such a valuable skill. I like we were talking about earlier, I didn't grow up with guns. I learned to shoot at Boy Scout camp and ended up being a pretty decent shot. And then it wasn't, then when I went to college, we were so broke, I couldn't afford anything. I was trying to buy food. It wasn't until I read Thomas Jefferson and did some, I was a rhetoric major, and there was like a rhetoric of like, I want to say it was like a Constitution and like our founding fathers, a class. And I'm just always fascinated by the age of our founding fathers. Like
Right.
some of those dudes were in their 20s.
I know.
Because whenever you see pictures, they always have these white wigs, and
Yep.
I just kind of always imagine them as like old men. And then when you look at like the ages of the people that signed the Declaration of Independence, they were like 25, 26, 27. I think Ben Franklin was like the oldest at 70s, but the majority, Thomas Jefferson, all those guys were in their 40s and 50s. Or in their 30s too. So like that was really impactful for me when I realized that, like, you sign your name to this, you're signing your death warrant. And these guys were willing, give me liberty or give me death. They were, they were about it. They weren't just fucking talking about it. And, as you go in, like the Second Amendment guarantees the First Amendment and the right to bear arms. But I also believe that there was a like very real, like, if we give you the right to bear arms, you have a like constitutional right to be proficient with arms. If they have to clear out the militia, you have to be physically able, you have to be proficient, and you have to be able to train enough. Like you were joking, asked me if I hunt. I'm like, geez, almost every night. Yeah. So, I shoot so much whenever people are like, oh, we're going to go hunting. I'm like, oh, all right. Like, just because I'm not necessarily bored. I almost looked at it as like a function of just basically eradicating hogs. Yeah. But I really thought that, like, one, you got to, and I'm not, I've met some people that are really obsessed with guns, especially here in Texas. I've been to some parties where like dudes will like, I went to this guy's house. He basically opened up this room and I was like, holy shit, dude, I've never seen this. Like there isn't a locker in a tier 1 organization that wouldn't be excited what this guy had, and shot nothing. Like the guy collected the guns. I'm like, do you shoot this stuff? Not really. No. And I was like, oh my God, this is like
can I shoot this stuff? Yeah.
This is like I'm not a Ferrari guy, but if you ask me to drive the Ferrari, I'm going to drive it 200 miles an hour. Yeah. So I kind of felt a little, not inadequate, but I just didn't know, like, I'm not necessarily like a gun obsessed dude. Like, no, this, and I'm HK. I'm like, I don't know, dude. I just like the ones that shoot straight. Yeah. So it was, and I can kill shit with. So, but like that was kind of a deal where I realized, one, you got to be physically able. Mm-hmm. And if, there was, let's say, a calling out of the militia, because if you think about it today, it's probably going to be people like us, opposed for maybe some younger kids. That was one of the things I spoke at a conference on national security for the War College out in Pennsylvania like 2 years ago. And my presentation was on the largest threat to national security has to do with the lack of physical readiness from kids 16 to 18, which would be from our military pool, but also from adults that were like 26 to 40 years old. Because if something were to happen, like, God forbid, a million Chinese nationals come across the Mexican border, like, who's the people that are going to go out and defend them? It's the same people that we saw when Houston had that huge, I don't know if you saw this, but like there was that huge flooding in Houston. There were like hillbillies in bass boats with like lifted F-150s trying to go down there to save people, so much that there was a fucking traffic jam of those dudes. Man. And I'm like, those are the dudes that, like, if something bad goes down, like a collection of hunters and those individuals, like those are the people you call out. And and it was kind of ironic that I was at Berkeley at the time, which isn't very...
not tolerant of that.
Not tolerant of this mindset. But I just remember thinking, like, the day I can afford to not only own weapons, but also train and be proficient with them, like, it's something I have to do as a taxpayer and as an American citizen.
I 100% agree. And I think you're probably in the minority of people who feel that way. And not, I don't mean gun owners, but I think there's a lot of gun owners that aren't tactically or technically proficient is probably a better word.
Physically proficient.
Or physically proficient, right? But it, man, obviously, I hope we never come to that situation. But
hope is not a good plan.
It's not a good plan. But I know where I stand, and I know I would be ready, and I know my peer group it would be ready, right? And I hope that we get the law enforcement buys into what we're trying to teach, because that really is our first line of defense is our law enforcement, and they need to be prepared for acts of terror. They need to be prepared for workplace, school place shootings, all that stuff. And they're just not there yet.
And maybe this is a different view because we live here in Texas, which is a little bit spread out. But I feel like if my first line of defense is dialing 911, I'm probably in a deficit. Right? Like,
you tell me, because I think Texas is a standing ground state, right? But there's a lot of places where if you shoot your gun, you're opening yourself up to the possibility of going to prison, whether you're justified or not.
Massachusetts,
right? Massachusetts, it is a lot of states like that. So
when I went to go play for the Patriots, when we went through our security brief, because they always have like a chief of security in the deal. I was living in California, but I had lived in Missouri,
Yeah.
And had owned a bunch of NFA weapons. And when we came back to California, I pretty much had them transferred to a safe deposit box in Arizona because I couldn't bring anything back to California. And when the day that we moved here to Texas, I like swung through and picked up all my stuff. Yeah. I just remember being like, finally.
It's just like,
I was like, man, I got all these suppressors and SBRs and stuff. And so it was cool to come to Texas where, you can legitimately hunt and use those things. But like, I feel like maybe Texas is a little bit different. I don't know. But I mean, for most of these states, I mean, you're talking about first line of defense, and I'm thinking about, and you talked about like the once in a million deals, and instantly what came to mind was the Boston bombers. Yeah, it was like a pressure cooker.
Yeah, pressure cooker bomb.
Cooker bomb, which I mean, classic. I mean,
did you watch the I think it was Netflix did a special?
Yeah,
I mean, it's eye opening to see the response, and that's so Paul Fitzgerald, one of my partners, he was the superintendent. So. Number 2 in BPD ran the intel during the bombing. So we've had a lot of opportunity to discuss it and add feedback with the AAR process on how we would have done things differently at our level, or how we would better prepare if something like that were to happen again. And I give them credit. They were very candid on that documentary and talked about some of the stuff that went on. But man, the lack of fundamental training for that kind of event to happen, and that is nationwide, that is not specific to Boston, is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It should be a warning sign to our political leaders and the people doing the budgeting that we need to change. We need to fix the way that we train law enforcement, because you can't train on the job, which is what they do, for an event that only happens once in a career.
Yeah, but I mean, that could be the difference. I mean, like the Boston bombing deal.
Yeah, it could be.
And the other thing that blew me away was those guys they were on people's radar.
Oh, yeah. At least the older brother was.
Yeah. I mean, he was, he had been like, that's what I and I realized like we have an interesting balance in this country, right? Like, so I have, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, right? Yep. I have the life to live. I have the right to live the life that I want, unabated by other things. But yet there's also like, you're not allowed to be a fucking asshole and come and destroy America. So like, I have this interesting balance.
Are you though? I feel like,
I firmly believe like during COVID, I got invited to go speak at this, they called it a freedom rally. And the guy asked me to come talk. And my piece was always about like, in terms of like our founding fathers, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, right? Yeah. I have the right to live my life. I have the right to like what defines my happiness. Mm-hmm. And, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Like I should be able to live my life unabated, but yet you're also living with 330 million people, and not everybody looks at the same way you are, where I'm like, hey, I'm not, like the Alex Sonnenberg, who's since passed away. He was involved in that 30 Seconds Out company. Mm-hmm. And like, I love their slogans. It's like, expect to self-rescue and some of those other things, which I think are funny tongue in cheek, but they're all pretty
accurate.
Yeah, they're pretty accurate. That like, if there's a bad situation, like I carry a first aid kit, I got a go bag in my truck. You need to have a first aid kit. Yep. Or how many people don't know CPR? Like there was a deal where a guy had a guy had a heart attack, and a dude there had just taken a CPR class and basically worked on the dude for 30 minutes while the ambulance showed up, and they were like 30 minutes late. And the dude basically was like, I got this, and did CPR for 30 minutes, kept the dude's heart going enough to where they ended up saving the guy's life, and they were like, what made you? He's like, I had just learned it, and I knew if I stopped, he was going to die. So like that dude, if that guy hadn't been there, that guy would have died. And so I think like, there's a level of proficiency that you need as a, especially here in Texas, like you should be able to run some equipment. You should probably be able to weld. I mean, I can weld and fix shit. And, I just have always looked at like, if you have to call somebody on the phone to fix every fucking problem, are you really understanding the framers of our Constitution? Are you really putting yourself like, are you doing something like, does that make sense?
It does. But that's kind of the country we live in, right? Everything is a matter of convenience. And if you don't have to do something out of necessity because it's so convenient to you, a lot of people aren't going to do it. And, general first aid, that is huge. It's something, my kids roll enough. I sat down and I took out guns. I'm like, hey guys, this is what guns are like, and give them the safety brief and teaching them how to shoot. Not that I think they have a big interest in it. They don't, but at least they have a working knowledge of gun safety, because they're going to be in situations with their friends or whomever where they probably don't have that working knowledge of gun safety. So again, everybody's sitting here on their PDAs doing that and not paying attention to critical life skills that you and I probably learned because we didn't have the distractions that everybody has now.
Well, we also, when we left the house, my mom told me, don't get abducted in a van. So you're like riding around looking for perverts trying to pull you into a van.
Right.
It's like a big part of our deal riding our bikes is looking for fucking weirdos.
Vans with free candy on the side.
Just learning to escape and evade,
Having, I remember we had a little call sign or code brevities. Like if I'm in the hospital, I'm going to send something. They're going to tell you this. That way, they're like, I can't say I've ever done that with my kids, but I also treat my kids a lot differently than I was treated. And
is that good or bad?
It's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And some of it's where I'm at. Not that I live in an unsafe neighborhood. Some of it is, I think we see so much stuff that we didn't see in our generation because information is so accessible.
Yeah.
It's, also a little bit of, I've seen and done a lot overseas that makes me a little bit more concerned or a little bit more on edge. And I sometimes can take that out on my kids. Yeah. So, yeah.
My daughter told me today I was taking my son to basketball camp, and she, we were listening to like some 80s music, and she's like, I would have liked to. So she watched Stranger Things. So that's her like connection to the 80s. She's like, I would have liked to have grown up in the 80s and been a teenager in the 90s. I'm like, it was fucking great.
Yeah.
Like I appreciate that you guys have these phones and like the access to the internet and this, but I'm like, you realize that like current events happened and my dad read about them in the newspaper and told us about them.
Yep.
Or it might be on the cover of Time magazine. I was like, and then people had to watch the news and, I mean, like now
it's instant.
It's instant and it's almost too much.
It is.
And, and then the other one, and I'm sure way more about this, is disinformation campaigns and how you create instability, which is, I mean, that's a classic move by the U.S. government. I mean, we've been destabilizing countries for a long time.
Yeah. Not just us, right?
Yeah.
And it's happening. And I mean,
look at the information where it's happening in the Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah. You don't know what to believe. You don't. And from an educated position, you don't know what to believe. So from an uneducated position, what do you do?
Well, like for you, tier 1 operator, 18 years, tip of the spear as far as you can go. And you're looking at it and you're like, no clue. No idea.
It's crazy.
And I remember, I think it was, Noam Chomsky, manufacturing consent, the idea that a different disinformation campaign is successful when intelligent people don't know what to believe. Yeah. So it's not just like convincing the morons of something that is not true. It's when intelligent people that have the ability to, look through a situation and do critical thinking do not know what to believe, and they don't know what's right or wrong, and they're just kind of doubting a little bit of everything. That's when you know that a disinformation campaign has actually been successful.
And it's only going to get worse. And now we got AI to make it even better, right? So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. As soon as you said AI,
I want to puke my mouth.
I know.
I mean,
it's
because
tough.
like the fact that like they can manufacture, I mean, they can put words. I mean, I saw the deal where they were, they took Biden and like basically put a speech together and had him out there, and it wasn't even, I'm like, oh my God, dude.
Did you see the one where they, it was an AI video of a woman's daughter saying that she was kidnapped and calling? It was just the voice. And they sent it to the mother. It was an extortion plot. So they had AI generated, help me, mom. They've got me. You need to give them money. And she was fine the whole time. So I don't know where this goes. And certainly there's a need for it on many levels. But how do we control this? And especially with the next election coming up, because that's going to be a shit show anyway.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough.
So you've decided to tackle one of the most interesting communities for me, because like there's like growing up in LA, protect and serve was on every car, and then all of a sudden there was I don't know if you remember, there was a Supreme Court decision where I think it was a couple gals ended up, there was a home invasion, they were taken hostage, they were assaulted, the whole deal, and it was over the course of days. They called 911. 911 never showed up. They put signs in the deal, and they basically went and sued the police, and the Supreme Court basically decided that the job of law enforcement is not to protect and serve, but is to investigate and arrest. And so at that point, that was a pretty interesting kind of realization for me, because you think like something bad's happened, I got to call the police. That's not their function to be your personal protector. Their function is to investigate crimes and make arrests. So with that being said, I've kind of took it upon myself to realize that like, okay, nobody's coming to protect you, that you have to be your own, like first line. But then you have another, and I, most of the cops that I've spoken with, they don't really believe that. They were like,
Correct.
You know what, I'm taking this job to work, and we've worked with law enforcement for a number of years, but there's a community that's under budgeted, under-trained,
Undermanned right now.
Yeah.
Big time.
And then, and they're under attack.
Yeah.
And the big issue, and I remember seeing, it might've been, was it in Time Magazine? But it was like, and it was a negative article written, like the militarization of law enforcement, that, there's all these different pieces of equipment that these local law enforcements are buying that are military based vehicles and this, and they're basically creating jackboot thugs in our communities, which is kind of an interesting deal where, and then they were showing a bunch of law enforcement wearing plate carriers and these, we're not in Afghanistan, we're in America. Why are these guys dressed like this? And I'm like, and so you're kind of in this, I understand the need, but is it really needed? Do these guys have the training and this? And we're kind of in this interesting piece of are they managing communities, or are they preparing for, World War III coming through the door?
Well, we're preparing for whatever's out there. And certainly we're seeing things in our country now that we haven't seen before. And I think the marathon bombing was an example of that. 9/11 was an example of that. But even on smaller scales, we're seeing criminals that are doing things that resemble what we've seen downrange. Yeah. Right. So I am certainly, and I'm very conscious about this, I am not coming in to militarize the police.
No.
I'm coming in to teach mindset, leadership, problem solving. How do I handle stress and perform at my peak? Because that is what I did for almost 2 decades. But
what you're teaching is actually completely needed. Whereas the problem is that you have the bean counters that just want to buy more shit.
Yeah, not even buy more shit, but they want to spend money on things that are politically sensitive, but not necessarily needed. If you're obviously the catchword right now is de-escalation. We're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on de-escalation training, but at the end of the day, what are you teaching, right? The best way to teach de-escalation is to prepare officers to be comfortable in situations so they don't, right off the bat, they redline and they go to their weapon, right? If you allow them to work better under stress by training under stress, you build a natural de-escalation process into your service. But they want to bring in therapists and all this stuff, and not they, some departments.
Well, the proverbial they.
Correct. And it's not really what's needed. The officers know that that's not what's needed, and what they fail to account for is there is a bad guy with a gun that doesn't necessarily give a shit about your de-escalation technique, because you can do everything correct, and that person still will have to get shot, because nothing you can do is going to stop them from whatever behavior it is that they're doing. So I think the biggest problem we face right now is that the general public doesn't realize the capability of law enforcement. They see stuff on TV, they see stuff in the movies, they see one-off events that the officers performed poorly and someone died, but they don't realize that, well, they performed that way because that's how they were trained.
Yeah, the one was down in, here in Texas recently.
San Antonio?
Yeah, it was the San Antonio. Was it Bernie? No, Uvalde. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, Uvalde.
Yeah,
right.
And those guys were
tapped. They didn't know what to do. Overwhelmed by events, right? That's what we'll call it. But and I'm very critical of law enforcement. I said this with Sully yesterday. Critical of law enforcement, but very defensive of police. As individuals, because I think for the most part, they perform under pressure. And when I look at a situation like Uvalde, it's terrible. I don't know how you don't go in. I don't know how, but I look at it from a technical expert and I see it, and I see the confusion, and I see the lack of leadership and the lack of decision-making in the inaction, paralysis by analysis, we call it in the military. And I can tell you, half of them had active shooter training. Right. And I can tell you right now that the active shooter training certainly wasn't enough, because there are so many things that could have been identified in training that didn't get identified until the actual event. And again, I go back to, I can't teach you to be a SEAL in a week, but I can identify the problems in your training and help you build a program that you can use to fix them. Because you need to train all the time. We talked about it with jiu-jitsu, and it's not a one-time thing. You can't train for 40 hours a year and expect to be proficient, especially when you're training every aspect of your job in that 40 hours, not just critical incident response.
What about like physical readiness? Kind of similar to you, like the people that tend to come to us are more like the SWAT type guys who realize like, hey, I'm going to have to, there's a SWAT test. I got to carry something heavy. I got to do this and this. And so there's kind of these like series of tests that they have to overcome that require a level of physicality that's pretty high. Whereas for the average, flat-foot beat walker, the guy that's, running a patrol car, he's probably going to be sitting on his ass for like 80% of his entire time he's out in the field. And then he gets out of a car and maybe walks up and he does this. And like, it's not as if he's in a situation where like a physical culture is requiring him to do his job. Until he is. And, we were down in, Artesia, New Mexico at Flexi, and we've also gone out into, Georgia and gone out and worked with the guys at Flexi out there as well. And like, they do a really good job of like, putting these guys into, fight prep and preparing them in this, but how many people take that and realize like, I got to be in shape because there might be something that requires it, opposed to guys, like, it'll never happen to me.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing, right? But you're talking a culture of almost 800,000 people. And
is that the number of law enforcement?
About 800 grand in the U.S. right now.
Wow.
It's a lot, and they're undermanned.
Well, I mean, there's 1 million people in the Army. I think there's 3 million in all of the armed forces. So, I mean, it's less than 1% of this country. So you're talking about like, what's that, about 0.5% of this country is in law enforcement?
But the culture in law and the military is similar. Law enforcement, military are very similar, right? Not everybody is in shape. You have your special operations that seem to prioritize it, just like your SWAT teams. But there's definitely, from what I've seen, it's becoming more of a conversation. But you have people that work 60, 70 hours a week, have families, and the overtime is how they make money, right? Sure. Or because they're undermanned and they're picking up the slack. And then you want them to train whatever it is on their downtime because they don't have the time to do it when they're working. It is a mental health as well as a physical health crisis in law enforcement right now. And we see that, right, in our jobs where we're downrange and we're expected to be at peak performance. And I said it earlier, there wasn't a point in my career where I wasn't hurt or recovering from some kind of injury. And working the hours that we're working and then expected to do stuff on my downtime. And it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, I'm going to kind of be selective of what I do. I can't do it all.
Sure.
So again, I'm protective of police officers. I do think on the physical mental health side, they need help, but there also has to be concessions from leadership that allow them to do that. And they're not funding people like you to come in and teach them how to be healthier. And some places are, and there's groups O2X, I don't know if you know them, they're doing it a lot with the fire department, and they saw how well it worked with the fire department that now law enforcement is like, oh, okay.
Well, we've had a few different people from the fire departments and kind of the fire service, and like the biggest issue they run into is drugs and alcohol, having to deal with like suicides and this, and we had, her name's Annette, and I can't remember her last name. She came on, and she that's her whole deal, is working with these firemen because they have to go out and see like the most awful things in the world. Family dies and this, and then they have to go back and process this trauma and go back to their own families, and drugs and alcohol and coping mechanisms and suicide is so high, and you're like, you get into this job to want to go help people, and next thing you know, it eats you up. But we've been real fortunate, especially in our training program, especially our One Hammer, which we actually developed for the U.S. military when we were doing our contractor piece I was talking about. A bunch of LEO guys are on that, but it always feels that like whenever I get in and talk to them on our servers in our Discord, most of them are in this kind of like, hey, I'm going to SWAT and I have this need for it. And it's just, I mean, there's a certain type of personality, and like those aren't the people we need to be worried about.
Right.
I mean, like you said, it's the, the guy in the patrol car who happens to be just driving by when the 911 call comes in. Like that's the guy you need ready. And like, how do you build that culture, especially when you have, what just happened in the last couple of years where all these, I'm going to use a profanity, fucking idiots, trying to defund the police because it doesn't fit within their social agenda. Right. And this idea and all the fabrication of systemic race. I mean, it's fucking bullshit.
It is.
It's and then all of a sudden they wonder why crime goes up. I mean, there's a deterrent for
1-to-1 ratio, right?
Yeah. And bad guys are smart.
Yeah.
If all of a sudden they're like, defund the police, it makes being a scumbag criminal a lot easier.
Yeah. And we're seeing it firsthand. And we're turning, and you kind of touched on it earlier, we're becoming passive policers. Right? We're waiting for things to happen to respond, vice trying to figure it out before it happens and prevent it. And usually that means someone gets hurt, someone loses valuables or whatever. It makes officers not be able to do their job effectively, and the communities suffer. And that's what I'm about. I'm about community safety.
Well, I mean, I had like what was it? Was when Giuliani was in New York and he had the bump and frisk or
stop and search.
Yeah, stop and search. I mean, the amount of guns that they took off of people was astronomical, and it made New York a safe place. I mean, it was, and then I saw a whole deal where they were like, it was racial profiling. They went through it. Yeah. And then when you look at the numbers of guns that they took and how it affected crime, I'm like, like you guys are claiming all this, but at the end of the day, like if people are safer and you're getting guns off the street that shouldn't be there, like I don't really care how people feel about it.
Disinformation, right?
Well,
in a way it is the disinformation campaign. You get people on your side, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Isn't that what they say, right? If you complain loud enough, things are going to change. And that's kind of what we're seeing, or what we're seeing, right? And until the crime rate started to spike and hopefully.
So what's like, you have an interesting position because your hand is kind of on the pulse through your 501c3 community first. Is there, because there was this kind of big move in terms of defund the police, and now all of a sudden there's kind of a move because everything swings this way.
It does.
And then it swings back this, where all of a sudden now these people that were screaming about defund the police, their cars are getting broken into, their home invasions and this, and now all of a sudden we need to bring the police back. But what's hard about that is probably a ton of police and probably able-bodied law enforcement have just gone and found new jobs. And there's probably not a deep pool within the candidates, especially in the academies, because of the way, the negative perception of law enforcement in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Recruiting has taken a huge hit. And the quality of candidates, I guess we're going to find out how much it changes. I think the second and third order effects are going to speak volumes about how much that actually affected the law enforcement community, the campaigns, because I don't think a lot of people actually defunded as much as you heard about the defund campaigns. I think funds were reallocated, taken away from things and put into other things, but not necessarily taken away. But it was enough to damage morale within the ranks, where people who were at retirement age, instead of staying in and giving back some of their experience, are now like, well, no, I'm going to get out. Or people who were thinking about coming into law enforcement, which was big in blue collar cities like Boston or Chicago, New York, were like, I can get the same benefits by being a fireman. Generational law enforcement now don't want to be in that community. They want to be in the fire department, right? So huge impacts.
Well, yeah, they got days off. They got chili cookouts every single day. They got like those
Nobody's shooting them.
Well, they got those calendars. So they get to take shirtless.
Oh man, those are great, right?
I always, one of my buddies in high school was a fire chief, and I'm like, I was supposed to bust his balls about like, they have like cooking stuff, and this, so it's just kind of this ongoing joke about chili cook-offs. But I mean, it's kind of an interesting piece that they're like firemen are viewed very positively, but yet law enforcement's got this kind of negative tinge. And, I guess like thinking back, like where did it all start, and it probably started with a camp corner with Rodney King. you know, and, you know, like those dudes are, you know, Billy Club that dude on this. And they also didn't show the high speed chase and, you know, not that you know, what happened to him is justified, but like, you know, the dude's on PCP and is, you know, driving 100 miles through residential neighborhoods, you know, fights the officers and the camera just happens to come on as they're two-handed Billy clubbing him. And, you know.
Yeah. And not to defend either side of the story. Right. And
it was really the first time. I mean, you know, the brutality and that, and I grew up in LA when that Rodney King thing went down and the whole city burned in this, but it just goes to show you how powerful.
Absolutely.
You know, just turning on the camera at this moment.
Yeah. And it's weaponized almost like the internet, the social media has become weaponized, you know, both anti and pro police in many ways. But the way that I look at it, obviously I'm going to defend law enforcement. You know, they're out there doing a job and they need our support to do it. Right?
I completely agree. Like people that want to don the uniform and go out and like that's their deal. Like I think we owe them as much support as we can.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? Is if they can't afford to get better, I'm going to pay for it and help them get better.
How are you fundraising?
I do. Obviously,
because I have a cancer charity, Wade's Army. It's 501c3.
How hard is that, right?
We've raised over the last 10 years, like excess of 7 figures.
That's great.
Yeah, so
it's one of the harder things that I've ever done is fundraising, and I've been fortunate to have a really supportive network of people up in Massachusetts. I don't know if you've heard of. There's, you know, obviously Born Primitive. I just started working with those guys. They're a fitness apparel company in Virginia Beach, started by a SEAL.
Dude, I have some of their gear.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So they're coming out with a tactical line in September. So I'm working with them to really get some exposure and to help vet their gear and get it out to people that need it. And there's a couple other corporations up in the Massachusetts area and a lot of individuals who see the need. And as soon as I pitch them the process, they were on board. And so a lot of private donorship, which makes me sustainable. It's not my long-term play. I need federal money to be able to do that. I need corporate sponsorships. I need Walmart, Target, grocery stores, the places where these critical incidents are happening to jump on board and be a corporate sponsor because they see the value in community safety by improving the response of the people that police the communities.
Sure.
But right now, the majority of what we've gotten has been through private donors. Fundraisers, the operator for a day, bringing people out to ranges, letting them shoot. Mm-hmm. In December, Army Navy games at Gillette. So we've got Team Impact. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they take disabled children with you know life-changing disabilities and they draft them to a college program. And they become a teammate of whatever. It doesn't have to be football or any sport. Yeah. And they follow the team for a couple of years, 2 years. And they are included by the players in the teams and the communities. And they become, you know, local heroes. And it's something they would never have otherwise. We came up with this plan to draft a kid on Army, draft a kid on Navy. And my charity will follow them and support them throughout the season, and it'll culminate at an event at the Army Navy game up in New England.
Oh, badass!
And it's going to be really cool. We've got support from the Kraft family. We've got 50 tickets that we're auctioning off. So if you know anyone that wants to go and hang out with us and be a part of it, we're going to start doing the auction here soon. We'll auction off half, and then the other half are going to go to veterans and first responders to be able to be part of the group.
Nice.
And yeah, so there's. We're working the fundraising piece. The future is federal funding to be able to do that. We just need to establish ourselves and show that what we're doing is actually making a difference, which is hard because it's not necessarily quantitative, right? You would need someone you train to be in a situation where they can show that what they've done has changed. Mm-hmm. I can tell you right now, the morale changes when people go through the training. The feeling of accomplishment and the ability to know that if I needed to do something, it's there. To know that my chain of command supports me because they're bringing in people like this to help me get better at my job.
What's the like? One I was going to ask you, kind of take me through the training, but like you know, when you come in, obviously with your resume, and you meet law enforcement, are they like, shit, like these are legit cats?
Yeah, it's one of those things where your reputation precedes you, right? Yeah. I have a resume that for that kind of training. I don't need to go show you that I can do it because I never would have gotten to that spot if I couldn't do it. Right. So there is a level of.
So you have to come in with you like your trident on your chest and you're like.
Yeah. Pretty much. Right. Yeah. We talked about that earlier. Yeah. And it's funny when they announce a training in certain places, everybody wants to do it. So it's unlike a lot of training where we talked about being overworked and underpaid and underappreciated. And now you're like, hey, do you want to do this in your downtime? And nobody wants to do it. But now you have people coming in that you would never be able to work with in your career unless you're a big city SWAT team or a federal agent, and you're getting free training and learning some of the fundamentals that should be taught in the academy that you didn't get taught because it doesn't get prioritized.
So what, take me through what specifically, I mean, you talked about de-escalation, but are you teaching them like weapons proficiency, how to shoot? And
it depends on the department. So typically what we'll do is when we get an inquiry from a department, I'll get on the phone. I ask to see their SOPs or TTPs to kind of find out what they're doing right now. I do not have my own SOPs or TTPs that I teach because I don't think a week is enough time for them to learn my stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I want to come in and take what they're already using, identify, a lot of what they're using is usually 5 to 10 or more years old. It's dated because that's what they've had access to throughout their time, and just bring it up to date. And that's before I even come in and train them. We can identify some of that stuff. And then we talk about, well, what are your shortfalls? Where do you think your guys need help? But at the end of the day, until I see them in action, I can't really tell. Mm-hmm. So if I'm able to, I like to go watch them do training without me. And then we come back and we develop a plan. Okay, here's where I think you need help. And usually 99.9% of the time, it's just basic fundamentals. Mm. Like, how do you enter a room where you know there's a shooter on the other side of the door? Never been taught that.
So no dynamic entries. Let's kick the door off the hinges and fall right in the room.
I mean, yeah, right. It's stand in a doorway and exchange fire with somebody, right? It's
like just like the movies.
Just like the movies, yeah. And I mean, they're not going explosive. They're not doing any of the stuff. In many ways, their job is so much harder than ours. Yeah. And to think that they're doing it with at most a week of training and maybe 10 hours, 15 hours a year of firearms proficiency.
And if they make a mistake,
they get in jail.
Yeah, they get thrown in jail or they get burned at the stake of public opinion.
I have this analogy that I like to use because a lot of people don't understand the law enforcement military analogy, but when you talk sports, people understand it. Yeah. So, football, take a basketball player or a baseball player and tell them, hey, I'm going to teach you how to throw a football. So you grab an athlete, let's say a basketball player, you bring him in, and then you grab another basketball player that's already been through your training and you have them teach that basketball player how to throw a football. And you have all these videos of all the greats, Tom Brady, Joe Montana, Dan Marino's. This is how they do it. And then you grab some other random people and he's like, all right, now go throw to that guy. And you teach them how to throw to other basketball players. And then on, the fourth day, you run them through a couple plays over and over. So they memorize those plays. And you have the defense is people that have never played football or basketball. And then on Friday, you test them doing the same plays that you rehearsed the whole day. And at the end of the week, you give them a piece of paper and sign them off and said, hey, guess what? You're a quarterback. Well done. Good job. Now go back and play basketball. And then 3 years later, you call them up and say, hey, I need you here right now. Tom Brady's hurt. You're starting in the Super Bowl. But I don't know how to play football. No, it says right here, you're a quarterback.
Got a certificate.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's what they're doing. They're putting officers with a week of training into Tier 1 Navy SEAL operations and then crucifying when they fail. It's unbelievable. Crazy, right? Crazy. It's insulting to me to think that they can make someone proficient in a life or death situation with a week of training when I spent a whole career trying to do it.
And what's the, what's the complaint? Budgeting?
Usually budgeting. Yeah. And time. And
so we don't have time. We don't have the budget to train them.
And they don't. When you have a job where you learn most of what you do in an academy, but then on the job, right? 40 hours a year. That's the requirement in most places for in-service training. Wow. And that's everything. Not just tactical, typically not tactical at all.
So that's like 5 8-hour days. Yeah. So like they do like a 1 8-hour day. They just have to do 5 of those a year.
Correct.
And they do what? Like shoot like 2 quals?
Shooting is, go there and just make sure your proficiency is good and shoot.
No, when I was in Orange County, we would go out to Rahagis to go out and shoot. I don't know if you've ever been out there. It's out in the Inland Empire. And we used to have their quals. And we'd always go watch and kind of laugh a little bit at like the different departments coming out and doing their quals. I think it was like, what, like 50 rounds?
Yeah, it's not a lot.
No, and it's 50 rounds. And the interesting,
if that, right?
Yeah, I think it was 50 rounds, and they had to qual maybe once or twice a year. And most of the guys, like that was the only rounds they shot.
Yeah.
So they might like go out and like pre-practice like the day before and shoot like a few rounds, but like, like, hey, I shot 100 this year. Like, that's it.
Yep. I'm good.
And when I asked them, I remember going like, could you guys shoot more? And they're like, well, to some extent you can. And there's some other guys that shoot, but then you got to start paying for your own ammo.
Yeah. And go do it on your own time.
Yeah. And go do it on your own time.
And it differs. There's definitely some places, and actually, where was it? Some of the places in Texas I've worked were really good about it. Right. So you always have your right and left flank where, I can only talk about the averages. There are places that do it a lot better than other places, and there are places that do it a lot worse than other places. And a lot of that has to do with budget. A lot of it has to do with time, because you don't want to pay overtime or do things after you just worked a 60, 70 hour week to have to go do that on your own time.
Do you think that, obviously you being from Massachusetts is just kind of fortuitous in that way, but do you believe that the Boston City bombing, obviously bringing Boston into the kind of the limelight with this, and then, kind of seeing the way that, they were obviously tracking these guys, but then how they went and, I watched the whole, what was it, like Netflix or, whatever, the documentary. And then they, ended up kind of cornering these dudes and the whole deal. Do you think that kind of put a spotlight on? Because, if you think about like Boston, kind of similar to maybe Chicago, like, Boston police, New York PD. These are kind of these, like you said, multi-generation type places, like putting it there. And really, if that maybe assessing that these individuals needed something more after that bombing.
100%. But I think they knew that before. And again, not calling out the officers, but one of the big things that I noticed because we've been guilty about this in Tier 1 special operations, is we don't integrate with other units, right? And that was a big thing at 9/11 that came out. Intelligence services not talking to each other. Yeah. But you watch that documentary and you see the rift still to this day between the leaders from city, state, federal government, and how the time they spent arguing over who's in charge, how were we doing this. This is all stuff that can be identified with proper training and integration between units. And I get the state, city, federal not wanting to do stuff together, or that logistically it's difficult to do. But if you are a city here and a city here and you're not training together, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? And it doesn't happen. And that was our problem in the military. Like, we would never go work with the Army. We would never go work with other SEAL teams. We just didn't, because we felt like we have our little mission and that's it. And then there would be an operation that involved everybody. And it became a lot more difficult to get things done because you never integrated before. Yeah,
because I guess you guys have a different set of SOPs.
Correct.
Than these guys.
Correct. But when you go back to fundamentals, the fundamentals should be same across the board for situations where you have to integrate with other people. So when I go to, Department A and Department B, they're next door to each other and their fundamentals are different, or there are no fundamentals, that's a problem. But it's not about teaching the officers that. It's about showing people in the decision-making spaces like, hey, this is why this is bad. Here's an example, bombing, of what can happen. Like, it's amazing nobody was killed in Boston with you saw the bullets in the houses, right? Yeah. It's not the officer's fault. I hate to say it, right? But you are so pegged that you are doing things out of fear. Like, how many times the police train having pipe bombs thrown at them? None. Yeah. And now you're in a real world situation where people are throwing pipe bombs at you and shooting at you, and you don't really know where they are, and you're shooting somewhat blindly, right? That's the kind of stuff we need to identify in training to kind of teach out of the fear response. Sure. To get people comfortable in stress to be able to perform better and make sounder decisions.
How long do you think it takes? Like, you kept talking about like 40 hours, that these guys have to do with training. Like, what would be the investment for law enforcement? Like, based upon, like I said, like, you're not going to take somebody in a week and make them a SEAL.
It's a career.
Like how, like, I guess what I'm asking is like, okay, so they come out of the academy, they're like day one, like how long or how much exposure would it take to make these individuals like moderately proficient?
I am from the camp that I never stopped working on my profession. And right now, law enforcement is the only one responding to these critical incidents. That's it. The military isn't operating in the U.S., right? So we're not doing it. If you're going to ask,
was it posse comitatus?
Yes. If you're going to ask,
get rid of that, right?
If you're going to ask them to do that, then they need to be proficient at it. So I kind of look at it differently. I think law enforcement should be manned enough that they train a week, a month. And if you had a fundamentals course in the academy, standardized across the country, that you learn the basics of a tactical response to an active shooter or any kind of critical incident, something that wouldn't necessitate a SWAT team response, right? Mm-hmm. Because 90-something% of active shooters are done before SWAT gets there, which it's patrol officers.
Yeah.
And then you have a rotation of officers where they work 3 weeks, they train 1 week every month. And it doesn't all have to be tactical training. Ours is we train for 12 months to work for 4 months, or we train for 18 months to work for 6 months. 40 hours for 12 months. That's a problem.
Yeah.
So a lot of what I'm doing is trying to, I talked about
like re-educating,
like
the decision makers.
Exactly. Advocating the general public what the response is going to be. Uvalde is the norm. Like that is how most officers, the level to which they are trained. It doesn't mean that's going to happen every time, but I'm not surprised when it does because they're not taught any differently. So, Nashville, they had no active shooter training and they went in and did a great job. They still could do better, right? They still need to train and do better, but it was just, they had prior military guys who were aggressive and did a great job of motivating and being deliberate and going to the sound of gunfire.
Yeah.
Right. So
wait, though, Nashville had no active shooter training.
I don't know that firsthand. Wow. This is what I was told.
Yeah.
They had a couple of military guys just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're kind of relying on how bad the shooter is, right? The lack of skill of the shooter, and that your minimal skill was better than their no skill. So we need to have a sustained program of education for law enforcement to be able to respond to these critical incidents. And the benefit of that is that all trickles down into the other parts of their job where they can perform better.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're used to working at that high level of stress.
Yeah.
Or training.
Or just like a high physical readiness.
Yes.
That's the one thing that we've seen with the SEAL teams, that like when guys are physically fit and they're strong, they seem to be able to do their jobs better. Shocker, right?
And that affects mental health too, right?
Yeah. Well, there's definitely, I was actually telling my wife this the other day. So my dad passed away a couple of years ago of cancer, and my dad was super smart and was kind of had like an ego about being smart, and he was super condescending, which I always joke with most people where I'm like, you didn't grow up with a really smart, condescending father. That's why you probably don't have a quick wit. But my dad was super sharp, and I remember I didn't have like the research or just the information when he was alive like I do today, that there's a direct correlation between like, your brain intelligence and health and your physical readiness and just how strong you are in this. It's like a 1-for-1. Yeah. Like if you got a big aerobic base, you think about mitochondrial density, you think about motor, all these things play in, and, especially with brain health, if you want to starve off Alzheimer's and this, keeping, body fat low, body fat's extremely oxidative, muscles extremely insulin sensitive. If you want to help your brain be in good shape and lift weights and train and be proficient, learn new skills, this and like problem solving.
Say anything about drinking whiskey? Is that on our list? No. All right.
No, I just think that you got to be able to drink whiskey, because then one funny thing my dad always joked is and I think he might have stolen this from Dean Martin, but I always attributed to him. He's like, man, I never understand people that don't drink. Like that's the best they're going to feel all day when they wake up. Like I don't want that. Yeah. But I remember when I told him I wanted to lift weights and do all this, he's like, idiots do that stuff. It's kind of 10 over and over again. And he never understood like why I wanted to lift weights and train. And then when I got drafted to the NFL, I bought him a Porsche. I remember I slipped the keys over and I was like, this is what weight training did for me, motherfucker. He's like, yeah, I should have listened. But now there's so much interesting research, and it's not only just anecdotal, but it's down that like, your ability to cognitively function and, the higher level of physical readiness that you have, it means that you can handle so much more. Yep. And the fact that, they've reduced physical standards, the PT tests, all these others. And like, the joke about out of shape cops eating donuts, is a funny stereotype. And I know people take offense to it, but it's because it's more accurate than not. Right. And
again, that the military as well. We're not the only ones. And then obviously the general public, we're an unhealthy country right now. Yeah. And I would like to think that that's changing with the education that we're getting from, hopefully communities like mine, where we're kind of test dummies for some of this physical fitness and readiness and how it affects performance and recovering from injury and being able to provide max effort and brain health and how brain health affects your body and your mind. It's, man, I hope what you're doing and what I'm doing can affect just the general population. And it's a long road.
And I know this is kind of interesting, but the stuff that we do isn't for everybody. I wish it was.
I agree.
And what we've done at Power Athlete is we've carved out a good community of like-minded individuals. And within whether it be like within our Discord or, within like the team feeds and this, it's like a lot of really like-minded individuals that like, if they all got together, we'd have a hell of a party because everybody would want to eat some steaks. They probably want to have some drinks. They probably want to talk some shit. And like, even going through like asking people like, hey, like, how'd you get into training? Or, let's say if you were training like fight stuff, where it came from. And it's pretty interesting though. The guys that are law enforcement, a lot of ex-military. Hey, I got into this in the military and this, and now I'm into law enforcement. So I feel better for law enforcement that like, a lot of these guys are, former, door kickers or, at least went outside, went in harm's way outside the wire. And now they're in this and they're trying to use these skills for, to help, I guess, within the population. And maybe that pool of individuals ends up kind of infecting, and I don't mean in a bad way, but just like influencing
there you go,
a culture, like a physical culture of readiness so that these individuals are going in because, just the active shooter stuff that's happened recently. Like when you look at it, you're like, God damn. I mean, I was thinking about was it the Parkland shooter, the guy that went into the movie theater?
Yeah.
Was that the Parkland deal?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's funny when we get to a point where there's so many of them.
Oh my God.
It's hard to keep track of which one which.
And the guy didn't know how to clear a malfunction.
Yeah.
And like, he was like, and he was like, that 100-round man drum, which is, are complete dog shit because they jam.
Yeah.
But the thing which was probably the saving grace that the guy was such a fucking dipshit with the guns that he bought like the least effective, drum that had, a stovepipe.
Yep.
And didn't know how to clear it. I mean, like, it's just, and this is something I like go back and forth on. And so when I had a concealed weapons permit in California, which I was like one of like 10 people, right? So there was like a 1 week deal where in Orange County, they filed a lawsuit against them. And they got a favorable decision and it took them like a week to file the, injunction against it.
So anybody who got in that 1 week?
Yeah. And mine happened to be in the pool. So all of a sudden I got okayed.
Nice.
And then like the cops showed up at my house the next day to like do like a verification, right? And I'm like, holy shit, I'm going to get this thing. But then when I went down to actually shoot the qual, there was a dude in there who had zero gun experience that figured out, like, he just applied and figured out like this would be his entrance into getting like a gun. So we go shoot the qual, and the guy had it was like just like a NRA. I think he was shot like 50 rounds, right? It was like, 2 from 7 and this, you go back. So the guy goes to draw his pistol. Did we shoot? I think we could shoot from pistol, from conceal. I forgot how it went. The guy was just taking this, pulls the trigger, right? Gun doesn't go off, and turns to the instructor like this and does basically muzzle sweeps all of us and the instructor standing behind him, like 2-hand jacks him. And, they have like the, what are like
dividers?
Dividers, the standards, whatever it is, like jacks the old man into it. And the guy like goes down, like fucking this. And I had shot like 4 rounds, and that basically cancels the whole thing because this guy, like, the fucking gun jams, he muzzle sweeps this dude, the whole thing. We go in and then they put us back in the room and like, basically tear that guy's shit up and kick him out. Then we had to go back in and finish the qual. They almost canceled the whole class. But like, then they asked me when I got done, what I thought like of the experience. And I'd always been, put a lot of faith into the Second Amendment, and the right to bear arms. And I always kind of felt that like it was very simply written for a reason. But after leaving there, I realized I'm like, as much as I believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I think there needs to be a basic proficiency intelligence test. Yeah. And, you just can't hand fucking morons that can't drive a Ferrari or this and put them in harm's way. Right. And like, but then there's like this interesting slope of like, now you're creating this like, so like, I'm always been a believer, like, when you start regulating, we get into trouble, but I also think that maybe a time mile test can you run a sub 10-minute mile, or can you do 50 push-ups, or should you at least be able to, like, as you go, and this was, for concealed weapons permit in California, which is fucking hard. So it's not as if they were just the average gun buyer. These people had gone through, fingerprints and vetting, and there was a dude there that didn't know how to shoot and almost fucking muzzle flashed everybody. So I left there having like a kind of a conflicted feeling of like, fuck, man, like, I believe in the framers of our Constitution, the right to bear arms, but then I also don't believe that our forefathers ever anticipated the individuals in this country.
Yeah.
I mean, cause you got to think like those dudes could build their own homes. Like, I mean, they were like way different individuals than what we have today. I mean, these dudes basically came over on boats, build lives of this. I mean, gave a finger to the crown and dared them to come kill them, and we're ready to fight them. So, I mean, like, these were type A, very motivated, highly capable individuals that were looking to get it on.
Out of necessity. Which we don't have right now.
Yeah. Now we have cell phones and this. So, I mean, this is, but then you think, God, how intelligent were these dudes that they were able to write a document that's been able to govern something that they never imagined, but yet had enough wherewithal to understand what could happen and create the greatest nation in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Unsettling kind of tidbit here is I probably lost count as to the number of police officers I've watched do exactly what you just explained about that guy. Just, you put a little bit of stress and become completely unsafe with a weapon. And this is someone who carries a weapon for a living and is going to be potentially asked to use it. And my debrief point is, hey, can you stop pointing your gun at your buddy? That's what we're dealing with, right? And you can blame the officer. I laugh
more out of nervousness because
nobody expects that.
Well, I was talking about my dad. So my dad was grew up in LA. He was graduated high school like 16, graduated, I think, like college at 19. And he was a lawyer for basically a practicing attorney for like 56 years. And he was a DA and then a criminal defense attorney. And I remember he told me when I got my license, he's like, the single closest chance you're going to have to death and getting killed is at a traffic stop by a cop who's super nervous and undertrained. He's like, the amount of times that I've had to represent families and law enforcement as both sides of the deal where people have been killed at random traffic stops by nervous police. He's like, so when I was 16, he's like, you get pulled over, I want you to turn the car off. I want you to put the dome lights on. I want you to roll the windows down. I want you to take the keys out. And I want you to basically put them on the dash, put your hands on the steering wheel. Because here's the deal. If I can get you home, we'll fight it.
Right. He's
like, you're not going to win anything. And he goes, all he's doing is he's asking you to appear, and your dad's a lawyer. Your job is to get away from the traffic stop alive. Yeah. And so ever since then, I'm always like, still to this day, I turn on the dome lights, I roll the windows down, license and registration. He's like, don't say anything. Do you know why I pulled you over? No, sir. This, and if he wants to get you engaged in anything, just no, sir, hand me the ticket. I'm happy to sign it. I'll see you on that date. Yes, sir. And you know what? And he goes, these people that get into arguments and they want to battle and this and do all the stupid shit and like roll the window up. It's like, fucking, like, these people are insane. They're going to fucking die. And he's like, the amount of people that get killed at traffic stops because they're fucking assholes and their job is to get away safe. And like, the cops are walking up, and like, I always think from the law enforcement deal, you're walking up to a car. You don't know who the fuck this is. You don't know what they have. You don't know if they've been drinking on drugs. You don't know if they got a hostage in the back. You're like, you're just pulling them over on a routine traffic stop. Anything could go down. And these guys are nervous, and they're undertrained, and they're overstressed, and overworked, and they're not in good shape.
Yep, 100%. And ironically, most of these people who are involved in critical incidents where officer-involved shootings, it's not their first interaction with the cops. Almost all the time, any event that happens is someone who has had multiple run-ins with law enforcement. And when I kind of talk to people about this, and I try not to sound insensitive, but the more interactions you have with law enforcement, the greater your chances of running into the officer who is not equipped to be in that situation.
Oh shit! I didn't even think about that.
And that habit, the big one is the Potter case where the female officer pulled her gun instead of her taser.
Oh yeah.
She was not equipped to be in that situation, and they went back and looked at her training, and the training justified that, right? And it was her fault. But, again, you put yourself in these situations, you're running the risk of running into that person who is not qualified or competent to be put in a life or death, high stress situation. And as the assailant, victim, whatever you want to call them, that's perspective based, You might not feel like it's a life or death situation, but when you stress that officer out, they might, right? And just because you don't feel a certain way doesn't mean they don't feel a certain way, and vice versa. And I see that, and it's kind of why I started doing this, because I can see the red line going on these officers, and I can see the point where training should have kicked in and it didn't. And once they go red line, the guns come out and it becomes a different story where you revert to your basic level of training. Yeah. Which is that 10 to 15 hours of firearms.
And nobody ever rises to the occasion. People always follow the lever of their training, which I got from the SEAL teams.
Right. That quote is on my website right there. And
I mean, it's true. We talk about this at every seminar I've ever taught, that the only way you're going to increase your proficiency is by training and elevating it at all times. Because I mean, I saw this in the NFL, like there was never a moment where somebody came out on the field on game day then like all of a sudden was somebody that we didn't know them to be. Correct. Like I never saw somebody be like a punk or suck or do, be like dog shit in practice. And then all of a sudden show up and dun, dun, dun. Yeah. We used to make the joke that like, believe me, nobody was going to rip off your pads and you were going to become Superman after sucking at practice. Yep. Like the dudes that like were able to do it in practice and did it at a high level just went out on Sunday and did it a little bit better. Mm-hmm. And, that's why we were always nervous with young guys, somebody who hadn't taken the reps or done all that. And we have a starter get hurt and a young guy comes in, you're like, I know him. Jesus, I don't know how this guy's going to do. I mean, I haven't seen him do it. And then they're like, oh, he'll be fine. I'm like, we haven't seen it. Yeah. And, like you can't guarantee that this dude's not going to get somebody hurt. And, man, that was, an interesting piece. So I came in and started as a rookie, got hurt. And then I came back and started for the rest of my NFL career. And I wasn't a young dude after like the first game of my second year, just because I went out there and played at a high level. And I just remember there were guys that were older than me that hadn't played and they were still considered young guys because they hadn't had the opportunity to go prove themselves. Yeah. Especially on the line, right? We're just getting your ass kicked every day, right? So much fun. Yeah. Oh, dude. I like the fact. Oh, every day. Yeah. It was, I miss the guys. That's about it. Yeah. Not so much a job. I enjoyed the camaraderie and the training. I can't say that like I played with some amazing dudes that I miss seeing. Yeah. But like I think for you guys did it for your teammates. I did it for the violence. Yeah. Like that dude, like they always showed like, like a random picture of a dude holding a sign up. It's like, I'm here for the violence. Yeah. I was just there for the violence. You? Yeah. I just wanted to, whatever motivates you, right? I just like that. I got to get paid. I got to lift weights and train. And then I got to go out and just fucking try to beat some dude's ass for 3 hours. And I like the physical contact and the violence and the pain and the afflict and the fact that I got to punch and do all these things. And, there's dudes I played with that, if they were broken down on the side of the road, I probably would just drive by it. But I fucking really just loved running out there and doing the job for the fact that I got to one-on-one fight a dude for 3 hours. Yeah, and I got paid money to do it. I would say we're probably in the same boat. I think most of the guys, if you take the war away, it's harder to keep them doing the job, right? And you think about it, would you have wanted to train all the time and never play? No. Right. So it's the same thing. No. And we always see that sharp drop in Manning when a conflict or war is over. Well, I always joke that they paid me to practice. I played the games for free. Right. Which I always thought was funny because they always paid us on like the day after, if we played Sunday, like payday was Monday. And I always thought it was better if they had paid me before on Fridays. Before I'd be like, because I told them like, I got no problem. Like the week, the meetings, all that other bullshit. That's what you pay me for. The Sunday when I get to put on the game meetings and go out and play. That's the only thing. I mean, that's the shit I do for free. Yep. It's similar. It's a cultural thing, and not that anyone's wishing for war, but we're ready for it, and we want to. But I mean, can you imagine? Like it never even fucking occurred to me until you said it right there. Like and relate, and you made a interesting correlation that with the military, people make these assumptions until you put them into sports. They're not real. Like when you said like, I can't imagine going through training camp and going through all the practices and not being able to go out and play. So my, the year I got hurt, was my 10th year. And I think part of the reason I pulled the ripcord and ended it was had this like kind of weird feeling like, what if I go back and I'm not the starter? And I got to go practice and do all those meetings and all that and just stand on the sideline. And and then I remember like when I retired and this, and then I thought about it. I was like, fuck, maybe if I could have just gone and stole for 1 year and stood on the sideline and been like a good, like positive dude in the locker room and help the young guys get ready. Could I have done that? And, the money obviously would have been nice, but then at the end of the day, like that's not how I made my bones and that's not who I was. So then all of a sudden, like I was never a backup. I was always, it'd be tough to watch other people doing your job. Yeah.
Right.
I can't imagine in your situation,
Same thing.
like being in a situation where you're like, I get to train in this and I don't get to go down range. It's almost like I just wouldn't want to be here. I wouldn't want to tarnish it.
I showed up to work every day with the mindset that it's a selection. I'm being selected every day of my career. And if I don't do my job, there's a bunch of pipe hitters behind me that want it. And they're ready to do it, right? They're in the gym at 6 a.m. working out and on the range shooting and getting better because they want to do my job. And they can either wait till I'm done doing it and I move to my next job, or they can take it from me now because I'm not performing.
Yeah.
And that is not a mindset that I see in the civilian world since I've retired.
Obviously you're, kind of tip of the spear in that, like, at places like DevGuru, there's almost, and maybe it's like, I kind of imagine the NFL was a lot similar way where somebody might be younger and have a better skill set, but at the end of the day, running out the tunnel, they want the guy that's proven he's done it. And there's like a intrinsic kind of value in like this historical knowledge of like, oh, this guy, he's done it when the bullets have flied. He knows what he's doing. He has like all of this historical knowledge because he's been there, opposed from some young guy who might be a little fitter, maybe a little bit better, but like, this guy's more of a proven commodity.
This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market.
We've built our online training business by partnering with Train Heroic and helping us deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training.
And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best tech and training, go to trainheroic.co/powerathletehq. And now back to the show.
So you've had this storied career, 18 years, tier 1, development group, naval special warfare. You decide to get out and, what's the vision? I mean, obviously you started the 501c3, working with law enforcement, but what's the 10-year plan? Like, what's the marker for success? I mean, is it to be able to go in and, influence the 800,000 law enforcement around the world, and so that they have better SOPs, that they can take better care of themselves and if they're in active situations?
100%. I want to affect that community, right? Because I think they need it, and they need advocacy, and they need it from people that know what they're talking about. And specifically when it comes to high stress, high threat, critical incidents and working under stress. So, the 5-10-year plan is really to scale. And that is, I hate to say it, it's financially dependent, right? Because there's no shortage of officers that need the help. Where we have a shortage is of SEALs that are able to do this, right? Because there's a finite amount of SEALs. And sponsorship, whether it's corporate, federal, state, private, it doesn't matter. I need people to get on board and find my message resonates with them and want to come in and help. I getting into this, I thought this would be a job where I would train cops all the time and ask for money a little bit of the time. And I probably spend about 90% of my time fundraising now.
So you sound like a politician.
Right. It's crazy.
Where like you get to office and then you spend the next 2 years trying to fundraise for the next 2 years.
It kind of is. And a lot of it is because people, and we've talked about this a couple of times now, people don't understand where law enforcement capability stands currently. And so a lot of advocacy on my part to help educate policymakers, decision makers, and people who control the budget realize that what we're doing right now isn't preparing our people to protect our communities. And at the end of the day, I went to war for 2 decades because I wanted to protect my family and my friends and my communities. And while I was gone, law enforcement protected them for me. Yeah. So now I'm coming back and I'm still service driven, which I've always been. And I want to help those people that help me and make communities safer still. And I just have a different way of doing it. So, the way I see it is to employ, and this is everything changes, right? We got to be flexible and we kind of go the way that it takes us a little bit. I definitely have a vision of having SEALs who are getting out, preferably tier 1 or, our Army tier 1 counterparts, going back to whatever their hometown is, whatever state it is, and having them be my program manager for that area. Mm-hmm. So, what I'm doing mostly in New England right now, we can start building across the country by utilizing these guys. And I don't necessarily see it as a long-term play for them, but it seems like every guy gets out and has about that year and a half of where they're trying to figure out what they need to do. And so if I can pay them during that time and give back to their community and make them the subject matter expert for law enforcement on a response to critical incident, then that just makes sense to me, right? And then I can scale accordingly. And the limiting factor is just the money. And that's kind of what we're pushing right now. And we really haven't done anything to get national exposure other than I've gone on TV a few times to talk about it, but just starting the podcast now is really trying to introduce people to what's going on in the world, in the country.
Are you going to start your own podcast?
I am not. I don't think I have what you have as far as being able to.
What, you mean stupidity, blind?
Yes, that's exactly. Yeah, I would never call you stupid. You got me by 100 pounds. Come on.
I just call it like
behind your back. I would.
Yeah,
not to your face.
Yeah, not to your face. But because I think obviously you can come on other people's podcasts, but it'd be an interesting piece to at least keep in the back of your mind. I know when we started the podcast, I wasn't even on it. So when Power Athlete Radio started, I wasn't even, it was the coaches and some other people, and I was a special guest. Yeah. And then the more and more I got into it, I've kind of enjoyed, one, it allows you to increase your genealogy, and like the connection points in this, and you get to have amazing conversations like this with people that are literally outside, even though, what's amazing is even though we didn't know each other before this, the fact that we have so much common friends, it's kind of like my buddy Rick always says, when you push out to the fringe, it's like 1 degree of separation. Absolutely. And it's an interesting piece in that you're trying to bring your community, which has such a intrinsic value, and be able to use it in such a way. I mean, the guys, when they retire, all of a sudden they have all this like historical knowledge that it's great that they're able to download and be able to continue to spread it and use it, and hopefully put these guys in a better situation. Because I think in preparation for this, it was like each day there's over 3.5 million interactions with law enforcement by citizens across the United States. So, we have about 330 million people in this country. There's 3.2 million interactions with law enforcement that happen. And the reason that statistic was interesting was that they were, every interaction with law enforcement is negative in this. And they want to show these, almost like Roman candle moments. And they're like, okay, here was one interaction in the point of 3 million that day that ended up not going well. And that's all you want to correct. You didn't talk about the lady had a heart attack that law enforcement kicked in the door to save her life, or this person or this. I mean, all these other, good stories. And I think being able to shine a light on what law enforcement's doing well, because all we ever see in the media is all the negatives. And we're talking about the negatives as well, right? Because no matter how good you are at your job, in me being at the tip of the spear and where I was, there was never a point in my career where we weren't trying to get better. And I think you can't be in a community or a profession like law enforcement and not constantly be trying to improve. And, now. But that's not the mindset, is it? I don't think it is. I think with the individual officers, in many cases, it is. I think certainly the tactical side, SWAT, I think in most cases it is. And I think there's a lot of younger officers that are coming in and are very motivated to do the things that aren't being done. But, like we see in the military, policy kind of is the stalemate at times. Like, they want to do it, but they're just not allowed to do it, or they don't have the means to do it. So again, I go back to the advocacy part. We're trying to affect that. And I know it's an uphill battle, but I'm going to be the squeaky wheel, and I'm going to keep talking until someone starts listening. And I would love to get people in DC on board, because how much money are we shelling overseas to help other countries with their problems when we can affect this problem right now? I think all that overseas money just looks like creative money laundering to me. Yeah, well, you call it what you want. Yeah, but you can't tell me we don't have the money to fix this problem. No, 100% we do. And whether it's government subsidies or it's even local donors, I think if you as a private citizen want to have better interactions with law enforcement, I think it behooves you to be able to go out and invest into things like this. Sure. I mean, I would love to know that if I'm going to get pulled over, or if law enforcement's going to come to my aid in some way, I want to make sure that they're as proficient as possible and have every available training, opportunity, this. I mean, I would hate to, be in a life and day situation and, all of a sudden, like Barney Fife shows up with his 40 hours and is over there, with his wheel gun slinging from his hip. I'm like, nah, that's not what I need. And it's a fear response, right? It's fight or flight. It's a physiological response to being put in stress that, some people have it, the ability to handle it. Most people don't.
And some people you can teach, you can take them from here to here, and some people you can't. But in law enforcement, with the amount of officers you have, you can't do selection the way we do it in the military and special forces, right? Because you wouldn't have anybody left. You wouldn't have enough officers to do it. So there has to be, I think there should be some level of selection in law enforcement beyond what we have now. But you can affect that also by providing a better level of training, specifically at the recruitment stages and the academy stages, that will help identify who's better prepared to handle those types of situations.
Do you think recruiting out of ex-military is the right way? I mean, we were talking about the Nashville deal where it just so happened that it was some ex-military guys that were pretty aggressive and were proficient.
I think I don't know that's ever not the deal. I think that happens pretty frequently, but we're in a time where people don't want to be police officers, and I can't blame them. Like, why would you? There's that situation in San Antonio right now where the head of the department came out and criticized his officers for shooting the woman with the hammer. I don't know if you saw that.
I did not.
Within a day, didn't let the information play out. It's just like, that's not our department policy. And 4 officers now are getting arrested for shooting this woman who was, attacking them with a gun. And now I can look at the video and be like, man, that might not be your policy, but that's exactly how you train. If you have a policy, train to your policy.
Have you ever, guns don't make me nearly as nervous as knives.
Yeah.
For some reason, like whenever I see the knife videos, or Tony Blauer has it will always forward me all these closed circuit TV, and I've seen all this different stuff. I mean, where people get hit with knives, and the amount of distance that somebody can cover and stab you is a lot of times much quicker than somebody can draw from conceal and shoot.
Yeah.
And so whenever they're like, oh, this guy there was a situation, this guy got shot, he had a knife, and people are like, oh, he only had a knife. I'm like, dude.
Or shoot to wound.
Yeah.
When the president is saying, why didn't we just shoot him in the leg? That is a problem, right?
Yeah, because you know what? If somebody were to rush the Secret Service and rush the president, are they going to shoot to wound?
If he had talked to anybody in any profession that is required to carry a weapon or has to use it, special operations, Secret Service, they would have told him why.
I have a hard time. And I've made no allusions on this podcast on how much I dislike Joe Biden as not only a human, but forever. I mean, all you got to do is go back and look at the 92 crime bill. And, I remember my dad telling me years ago that there was probably no individual that did more harm to the black community and taking fathers out of the homes than this. I mean, Biden's shit. I mean, he had to walk on his, one of the first times he tried to run for president because he, accused of plagiarism, and he's lied and this, and he's claimed he's done. I mean, the amount of bullshit that Joe Biden has pulled over these years, and that they just were able to fucking whitewash by hiding him in a basement because Donald Trump was, got a fucking terrible spray tan, terrible hair, terrible fitting suits, and says crazy shit
and tweets.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, sitting on the toilet at 2 a.m. tweeting as a president of the United States, get rid of your fucking Twitter, and get a better haircut. You're a billionaire. Get a better fitting suit. The ties are too long. There's so much that bothers me. But, but then you have a guy who, I'm pretty sure they have him whacked on Adderall and something to be able to wheel his fucking ass out there because he's in the, deep in the throes of dementia. And to me, it's elderly abuse to even be putting him out there. And it's even more insulting as an American citizen to think that's the face of our fucking country. I mean, it's, we live in a time, and this, there's cryptocurrencies, there's cell phones in this, and we keep electing, elected officials like the President of the United States that born in the 30s and the 40s. I mean, you're talking about a guy that potentially around World War II. I mean, it's just it's not the person we need. They almost need the limit. Be like, dude, if you're too far, if you were a grandfather when cell phones were invented, you got no business being president.
Yeah. It's wild times.
Yeah. We're, and I'm kind of nervous for what we see in the next 2 years.
I on the nonprofit side, 100%, my own political views don't come into play. I remain very apolitical, right down the middle.
Very agnostic.
And I actually have gotten a lot of support from the left. And I know that sounds weird because the left, you think defund the police. Massachusetts, I had a Democratic state congressman and a senator go to bat for me on the budget and get me a line on them.
But I don't think it's a right, left wing, right wing. It's not a situation.
But that's what the media is pushing.
Yeah, but
right?
the
community safety.
The media is fucking toxic in every ways, and anybody that says that they're not is full of shit. I mean, community safety, and I think it's a bipartisan issue that you should want to have law enforcement and police officers. Because here's the deal: whether or not you want them or not, they exist. Right. And they serve a function in society. So it is our responsibility to make sure that if we're putting people on the street, we have to take, they have to have the best opportunity available to do the best they can.
Absolutely.
It's like I've always said in this country, if you're going to send people to war, you have a fiscal and social responsibility to take care of them when they come home. Right. Like you can't just abandon your, broken toys and send them to the island of misfit toys. You have to take care of your broken toys when they come home. Yep. And you know what? And if you don't, you send people to war, when you come home, you have to take care of them. You can't ask people to go do it and not. And I think it's, to me, I mean, that's like when they're like America this, I'm like, dude, like you send soldiers to war and they come home and they're broken and vets are committing suicide. You have to find a way to fix that issue. Yeah. And if it's, giving them better purpose and within the training or even within law enforcement, I think that's a smart play.
Yeah. I mean, acts of service are therapeutic, right? It's kind of why I started doing it. And I started working with One Summit, which is a charity started by a SEAL up in Boston that pairs up Navy SEALs with pediatric cancer patients for resiliency training and taking them rock climbing, right? Who would think to take a pediatric cancer patient out of the hospital to go indoor rock climbing for a day? Well, a fucking Navy SEAL would, right? And it was the first time I did it, I got more out of that than the kids, and just seeing how tough and strong those kids were. And that kind of drove me to want to have, my own nonprofit and do some service related stuff. And I just knew what my community was. I knew it was law enforcement from the get go.
So what was your, every one of the SEALs I've met that were kind of in your demographic, like they had one thing that was kind of unique to them. That was like what was your specialty?
I was always a breacher. So the explosives, and we have to be proficient in everything, kind of masters of nothing type people. But I get to a point in a career where you kind of have to focus on something, whether it's air or sniper or breacher or whatever it was. So for me, breacher, I wanted to be the first guy in the door, and sitting behind a gun somewhere else wasn't going to be that guy.
Well, that's a pretty good analogy for what you're doing today, tip of the spear, first guy through the door looking to help.
Oh, I appreciate that. I never thought of it like that, but it makes sense to me.
So if people want to know more, how do they get, how do they find you? How do they reach out?
C1P.org. That's my website. And, we're still pretty new. So we're going through those growing pains of building the website and social media and all that. That is not my wheelhouse. I don't think it will ever be my wheelhouse, but eventually I'll find like an 18-year-old kid that is their wheelhouse.
They're like, hey, you're really big on TikTok. You're like, what is, I can't believe I'm on TikTok.
But we're trying to get better at it. But to me, I spend a lot of my time either fundraising or training. But c1p.org, that's where you go, and you can email me directly through there. You can check out my Instagram as we start populating it more. All that is on there. You can make donations on there, which would be huge. Every bit helps. I tell people, if you want to sponsor training for your local police department, let's talk. Right. And there's a lot of people that listen to these podcasts that are pro police officer and are already supporting their law enforcement in some way or another. Like here's a way to get them the best training they'll ever have. Any corporate connections are always great. So I encourage people, if they have something that they think can help this mission, reach out. Awesome. And of course, law enforcement. If you need help, shoot me an email. I will never say no. It doesn't mean I can get down there and train wherever you're at, but I will get on the phone, we'll talk, and we'll see what we can do. Sometimes just reviewing SOPs and TTPs is enough to kind of point them in the right direction. And then just, if I don't have answers on equipment, gear, whatever it is, I'll put you in touch with the person that does. So there are things we can do in the meantime until I can scale enough to be able to affect nationally policing. So we're trying. It's building a business is hard. Building a nonprofit is different, as you know.
Yeah, no, we started in 2012. Yeah, 2012 was we started Wade's Army. So, yeah, man. Any way I can help, just let me know.
I appreciate that, man. This is huge. I appreciate you having me here and the conversation. And this is a great experience.
Yeah, we'll see you again. Well, thanks for tuning in. Another episode of Power Athlete Radio. See you.